A shameless schemer and notorious Civil War turncoat, Thomas Blood was the self-styled colonel who attempted the most audacious, ostentatious and outrageous jewel heist in history. He remains the only person ever to steal the most powerful symbols of the British monarchy, their coveted crown jewels. But did he get away with it? Welcome to Crimes from History. Thomas Blood was born in County Meath, Ireland in 1618, the son of a prosperous landed blacksmith of high esteem and owners of the most metal surname ever. The Bloods were something of a contradiction, since blacksmiths were typically part of the peasantry. Added to this, Thomas was raised Presbyterian, a somewhat fringe sect of Protestantism in a largely Catholic Ireland, possibly due to the family's English heritage. Thomas liked to be known as Colonel, although this title was never officially bestowed on him. As a child, Thomas was sent over to Lancashire, England for his education, which is where he met his future wife, Maria Holcroft, also a Presbyterian of wealthy descent. Thomas and Maria had 7 children and soon left England to raise their young family back in Ireland. Political tensions in England were high during the 17th century, and these anxieties were spilling across the sea to Ireland. King Charles I, despite being head of the Church of England, head, because it got chopped off, he married a Catholic woman in raging Protestant Parliament that was already becoming increasingly distrustful of the king. In Ireland, the Catholic gentry feared an invasion by English Protestants, fuelled by the increasingly disgruntled Parliament who sought to dissolve the monarchy in favour of establishing a republic. When the Civil War finally broke out in England in 1642, Thomas Blood returned to fight alongside the Royalist army supporting King Charles. Colonel Blood, however, was not a man renowned for his loyalty. Many speculate that Blood was probably engaged in espionage, acting as a double agent on behalf of both the Royalists and the Roundheads, the Republican army led by Oliver Cromwell, an enterprise which many believe Blood continued long after the Civil War was over. When it became clear that the Royalists were doomed to be defeated by the Roundheads, Blood cut his losses and switched sides to fight for Cromwell, like the yellow-bellied coward he was. In 1649, King Charles I was executed for treason and Cromwell was installed as Lord Protector of the Republic. In return for his service, Cromwell bestowed valuable land to Blood, which had been stolen from the Royalists and Catholics, as well as appointing him Justice of the Peace, with his name, Thomas Blood, Justice of the Peace. It's quite an oxymoron. Blood was wealthy enough to retire from the military and soon settled into a comfortable life with his family. But Cromwell's health was deteriorating and he died just 5 years after seizing power. Upon Cromwell's death, the Republican English Parliament began to disintegrate and the monarchy was reinstated with flamboyant dandy Charles II,
well, hello!
the son of Charles I, declared rightful king. Blood, fearing for his safety after double-crossing the Royalists to battle on the side of the Republicans, fled back to Ireland with his family. In 1662, the Act of Settlement was introduced, which sought to return the stolen lands that Cromwell had handed out willy-nilly. Thomas was unceremoniously stripped of the wealth and land he had acquired through Cromwell, and he and his family suddenly found themselves destitute.
Help me, I'm poor.
Seeking vengeance for this humiliation, Thomas regrouped with some of his former Roundhead comrades and began plotting a series of conspiratorial schemes against the Crown and its associates in Ireland. Over the next few months, Blood and his gang hatched several plans to kidnap prominent government officials, to siege castles and administrative buildings, and to break some of their comrades out of prison. Most of these schemes never even got started, and those that did largely ended in catastrophic failure. Thomas Blood, the ringleader of the gang, always managed to evade capture, disappearing into the mountains, leaving behind nothing but his fearful reputation to haunt the Royalist elite, never knowing where he might turn up next or who his next target might be. In one of these calamitous schemes, Blood's gang plotted to siege Dublin Castle, overthrow the government there, and kidnap James Butler, 1st Duke of Ormond, for ransom. The Duke was a staunch ally of the king, and Blood still wanted revenge for his land and wealth being confiscated by the Royalists, but alas, his plan was discovered by one of the Duke's spies, and many of Blood's gang were arrested, some even executed, for the crime of high treason. Once again, however, Thomas evaded capture by posing as a Catholic priest and fled to the Dutch provinces with a bounty on his head. Such was Blood's renown for trickery and deceit that his reputation lingered like a Labrador's trump in the English court, despite Blood himself being hundreds of miles away on the continent. Blood's name became eponymous with all manner of unthinkable crimes and tragedies. Rumours abounded about the notorious Colonel Blood. He was the arsonist responsible for the Great Fire of London. He was masterminding bloody revolts in Scotland. He shot JFK, to name but a few. In reality, though, after lying low in Holland for a few years, Thomas had returned to Kent in England, where he disguised himself as a doctor, living a somewhat inconspicuous life for 2 years. Blood soon grew restless though, and once again sought his revenge on the Duke of Ormond for seizing his land during the restoration of the monarchy. On the evening of the 6th of December 1670, Blood, along with his faithful gang, followed the Duke from his home, ambushing him and dragging him from his coach before taking him on horseback towards Tyburn, the infamous gallows. The gang intended to hang the Duke as little more than a common criminal, but the Duke managed to break free and escape into the night. Yet another of Blood's shambolic schemes had failed, but that didn't deter him from his tricksy ways. 6 months later, Blood would attempt his most ostentatious yet equally calamitous scheme of all. After the execution of Charles I in 1649, the crown jewels had been destroyed by the Republicans. When Charles' son, Charles II, was reinstated as monarch, an opulent new collection of regalia had been commissioned to replace the lost jewels. These new crown jewels were housed in the fortress-like chambers of the Tower of London, where the master of the jewel house, Talbot Edwards, was charged with their care. Blood, still searching for his revenge against the crown, devised a plot to steal them from under Mr. Edwards and the King's very noses. Then, as now, members of the public were permitted entry to the tower to view the jewels for a fee. Blood, disguised as a clergyman, attended the tower with a young woman who posed as his wife. Whilst admiring the regalia, Blood's fake wife suddenly feigned stomach pains, and Mr. Edwards, living as he did in such close proximity to the jewel chamber, offered to fetch some spirits from his apartment to soothe the young woman's pain. Once suitably recovered, Blood and the woman left, only for Blood to return to Mr. Edwards' apartment several times over the next few days, bearing gifts in thanks for the help he had given his ailing wife. After striking up something of a friendship, Blood offered up the hand of a fictional nephew in marriage to Mr. Edwards' daughter. Intrigued by the proposition, Edwards agreed to meet said nephew, so Blood, alongside some of his faithful gang, returned to the chambers a few days later under the guise of introducing his nephew to Mr. Edwards' daughter. Whilst they waited for Mrs. Edwards to serve them dinner, Blood asked Mr. Edwards to take them and his companions down to the chamber to view the crown jewels. Edwards, suspecting nothing untoward, gladly obliged, unaware that the cloaks worn by Blood's companions concealed daggers and pistols. Once the door of the jewel chamber was shut, a cloak was strewn over Mr. Edwards' head. He was struck with a mallet.
Okay, here's the mallet, and don't forget it's a word association game. Mustn't pause, mustn't hesitate, bashing the head like this. Or like this, one with the most bruises, losers look at each other, go bleh! Look at them and go bleh! Look back and go bleh! Good.
Thrown to the ground, bound, gagged and stabbed. But hapless as they were, the thieves discovered the bags they had brought with them to sequester the jewels were too small. Oh, for fuck's sake. Idiots. So, improvising, one man flattened the crown with a mallet, another snapped the sceptre in two, and a third stuffed the sovereign's orb down his trousers before heading to make their escape. As they fled, they were disturbed by Mr. Edwards' son returning unannounced from his military service. Mr. Edwards, breaking free from his bonds, shouted, "Treason! Murder! The crown is stolen!" alerting his son to the chaos. Blood and his gang fled to their horses but were captured by the tower guards before they could make their getaway. Blood's most scandalous and grandiose scheme had once again ended in disaster. Upon his capture and imprisonment, Blood demanded to speak with King Charles, refusing an audience with anyone but the monarch. Surprisingly, his brazen request was granted and Blood was sent before the newly coronated King Charles II, who was apparently curious to meet the infamous Colonel Blood. The king asked Blood what he intended to do should his life be spared. Blood simply replied, "I would endeavour to deserve it." Ooh, smooth. Blood should have been executed for treason for his attempt on the crown jewels, and yet the king saw fit to release him from prison. No one knows for sure why the king decided to pardon Blood. Perhaps he had previously served the king as a secret agent at one time. Some speculated the king feared retribution from members of Blood's loyal gang should he be executed for his crimes. Others speculated that the king saw the use in Blood's mischievous ways and shameless schemes, planning to employ him as an informer in the future. Or maybe the king was simply endeared to Blood's roguish ways, being something of a rumman himself. Whatever the reason, King Charles not only pardoned Blood but offered him a princely pension of £500 a month, restored his ownership of former lands, and offered him a position at court, affording the trickster great influence among aristocrats and nobility. This was quite a change in fortunes for the man who had long been seen as deceitful, double-crossing, and an enemy of the crown. Blood was involved in several operations for the king, deciphering letters between English dissidents and Dutch allies on the eve of the Anglo-Dutch Wars, advocating for imprisoned Presbyterians and transporting classified messages between Dublin and London. During his time at court, Blood became embroiled in a disagreement with the Duke of Buckingham, someone who had previously been a great friend of Blood. The Duke had been wrongly accused of the assault of a young girl by the Earl of Danby. The Earl sought revenge on the Duke, who had previously impeached him for corruption. Witnesses had been bribed to implicate the Duke in the crime, but when witnesses broke down under interrogation, it was revealed that Blood had been involved with bribing them. Furious at his former friend's betrayal, the Duke of Buckingham brought a libel case against Blood to the courts. Blood, whose position at court was already precarious given his past misdeeds, was imprisoned and didn't have the financial means nor the friends to secure his bail. The stress of imprisonment and his impending court case caused the now elderly Blood's health to deteriorate rapidly, and he was eventually released from prison because of his worsening health. What? He just keeps getting away with shit. Soon after his release, Thomas Blood developed a fever and died. Oh, okay, that was fine. He died at his home in Bowling Alley, Westminster, on the 24th of August, 1680. Yet even death wasn't enough to calm public distrust of Blood and his infamous skullduggery. Rumours abounded that Blood had faked his own death to avoid paying the £10,000 fine that the Duke of Buckingham sought in damages from the libel case. Barely more than a week since his funeral, Blood's corpse was exhumed from his grave so the authorities could determine once and for all that the terrible trickster Thomas Blood had truly met his demise. Upon examination of the corpse, it was agreed that his death was genuine, and the body of Thomas Blood was returned to its grave in St Margaret's Church. His epitaph read, "Here lies the man who boldly hath run through more villains than England ever knew, and never to any friend he had was true. Here let him then by all unpitied lie, and let's rejoice his time was come to die." Seems a bit harsh, writing how glad you are that he's dead on his gravestone. Oh well, it was a different time. Despite decades of treason, trickery and transgressions, Thomas Blood somehow managed to evade the hangman's noose. He died an old man in the comfort of his own home. The self-styled Colonel Blood, perpetual trickster, calamitous conspirator and serial schemer, remains the only person ever to have attempted to steal the crown jewels. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Sweet dreams.